somebody had been asking about boundaries around when they're married with somebody, and their idea of boundaries conflict. Like their spouse feels like the boundaries they want to put up is just from a place of trauma that they've been through. And this woman feels a little confused and conflicted, like, am I asking too much here? Because I haven't had the same kind of family life. Am I just expecting too much? Should I be more open to, allowing family, the spouse's family, to do the things that I feel like are crossing my boundaries? When you are married, of course, there has to be some compromise. And of course, there are always these places where we had different cultures that we were raised in. Even if we are of the same ethnicity, we often have ways that we were raised that are still different. One may have come from a household where there was a lot of support and love, and the other one may have come from the household where there wasn't really any, and there was a lot of chaos, and may have a lot of abandonment issues and a lot of mistrust because of this. And so they're going to naturally have different things, different needs. This is really why it's so important that you really, really do some healing work as much as possible before you get into a relationship, if possible. If you haven't and you're in a relationship, it's important that you prioritize that and that you heal, because it will interfere with a healthy flow in a romantic relationship. It is going to interfere with that. So when somebody puts up a wall, a fortress, let's say a fortress puts a wall up around it. The whole reason a wall goes up is because they feel danger, they don't feel safe, and so they put this wall up to keep everything out and to stay behind the wall, and they put guards up at the entrance, and to only let in what feels safe, what they deem is safe. So there's guards on the walls, guards at the door. And anybody that scales the wall is going to be shot down, right? You have to come through the entrance, and you have to get permission. And that is a wall. That is not a boundary. That comes from, again, a place of not feeling safe, of feeling threatened. So what does a wall do? A wall keeps you sequestered from them. It keeps them out. A boundary is not necessarily, it could have a wall around it, but to mark it, but it's not necessarily a wall at all. Matter of fact, it may not have any visible marking on it, like a land boundary. A boundary is there to say, this separates this land from that land. This is the boundary line. When you step over this line, you are now in my land. So a boundary is what separates you from somebody else. When somebody steps over within your boundaries, right, then there needs to be a mutual respect there. They need to understand that within your boundaries, within your kingdom, there are certain beliefs, certain ways of being, and that they may not be that person that has stepped over the same that they believe in the same way that they behave, but they're going to respect it because it's yours, and vice versa. When you are in their boundaries, within their boundaries, you're going to respect theirs. So we could see it this way. If somebody comes into my home, all right, that's part of my boundaries. I have a home that's separated from their home. And if they're coming into my home, and one of my boundaries, or one of the things that I believe, is that you don't cuss, which I don't believe that. I don't feel like I need to have a potty mouth, but I love to have a cuss word every once in a while. It makes me feel really empowered. just say that that's the case, and I have every right, if they start cussing, to say, can you please not use cuss words while you're in my home? Maybe your children are there. Maybe you just don't want that energy in your home. It also may be you're dating this person, and this person has a filthy mouth. And you say, if you want to date me and have this space with me, you're going to have to curtail the cussing. Now, the other person might say, well, if you want to date me, you're going to have to get used to it. And then they have to come to agreement. Well, I can handle a little, but I just don't want it constant. Or, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be dating, and you go your separate ways. Okay? So there's a mutual respect of what separates the two. Gaslighting happens when somebody doesn't respect that boundary. And instead of just admitting they're not respecting that boundary, they make that person feel bad for having the boundary. Okay, so they try to say, well, you shouldn't even have that boundary. That boundary should not be there. So that could be in the case of a spouse saying, well, because you just have issues. Well, maybe I have a boundary here because of those issues, but we need to have a compromise, or we need to respect this, right? If the spouse is just saying, I'm not going to, and it's just your issues, then they are stepping over a boundary. Boundaries can get really blurred when you have close relationships like that. One question is to ask yourself, and I find this helps me almost every time. When somebody says something to me, or does something to me, or expects something to me in a certain way that I'm like, what? But yet I'm like, well, maybe I'm just overreacting and I'm not quite sure. The one thing I always do is I mentally turn those tables around. Okay? So I ask myself, would I say that to them ever? Or would I expect that of them? Or would I treat them that way? And anytime I can say, absolutely not, I know 100% they're not respecting my boundaries. And there are some boundaries that are just boundaries, period. Like one is your body. Nobody should ever touch, nobody owns you. I don't care if you're married or not married. Your body is your body. And if you don't want it touched, perhaps, you're making love and you don't like a certain way that it's being touched, you have 100% rule over your body. You are sovereign over your body. So that's a boundary that everybody has. And a lot of times in childhood and in abuse, those boundaries, when we didn't have the power to enforce a boundary, those boundaries were obliterated. Before we even knew what they were, had any power over them, they were obliterated. A lot of times this comes with physical abuse. It can come with your things being taken away from you. It could come with being forced to watch things or listen to things that you were not ready for. And it could be just flat out sexual abuse. All those things obliterate your personal boundaries. And then you grow up without them. And then you get to a place you start hearing about them and you're like, okay, what the heck is boundaries? And where do I even start to know what a boundary is and where to put it up? And that's where it just takes time and learning and enforcing them and starting to understand what makes you separate from somebody else. Because a lot of times in homes where there has been abuse, there's a lot of enmeshment going on. Especially in families where there's a lot of dysfunction. Let's say they had an alcoholic father, and then, a few siblings. I came from a lot of siblings and a big alcoholic father, okay? So there was a ton of enmeshment. Basically, they clung together. They fought, but they clung together too. And they banded and formed almost like a camaraderie like you get during wartime, right? Where you depend on one another for survival. And you grow up and you continue to have that. So you grow up with this family where other people kind of move on and make their new lives, and then they have that, okay, this is my life, this is your life, and they have that respect for one another when they've been in a healthy home. People that were enmeshed like that, they don't have a clue of what a healthy boundary is. They just think, because you're a family, I have a right. I have a right to ask you to come help me. I have a right to live with you if I need a home. I have a right to be who I am, say what I want to say, and get in your business and ask you what's going on. No, absolutely not. That is not healthy. So in case you're wondering too, by the way, this right here is the Venus symbol, the planet Venus. And Friday, Venus is the ruler of Friday. And Friday is about love and beauty and prosperity. So for fun, I thought I'm going to put that on my cheek. So there's a second question that you can ask too. So the first one is, if the tables were turned, would I do that to them, expect that of them, whatever, say that to them. And the second one is, you can ask, you can think of somebody that you have a lot of respect for. And you can say, would I do or expect that of this person ever? Would I do that? And just fill in the blank. Would I do that or expect that of, fill in the blank, somebody that you have a lot of respect for and that you show respect to. And if you could say, no, I would not, then again, they're not respecting your boundaries. They're not respecting you. And that is the time that you're going to have to speak up. And in my course, we work on that. And when you coach with me, we can work on that in a more personal way, in a more one-on-one way. But basically, that's what needs to happen. You need to start speaking up, start practicing saying no, start practicing putting your boundaries up and reiterating when somebody isn't listening to them that I don't do that, I don't want that, or whatever, okay, or that's not acceptable. You've got to enforce those boundaries. When it comes to working with your spouse, you've got to not allow that spouse to gaslight you. You've got to call them out when they're gaslighting you, because a lot of times people gaslight and they don't really think I'm gaslighting you. Right? They don't really understand that's what they're doing. So sometimes you need to call them out on that and say, hey, you're completely making this off subject. This isn't about my trauma. It's about my personal boundaries, and that is not acceptable to me, and we need to come up with a compromise here, okay? So say you have a family member that's just showing up at your door any time of day, and you have things to do, whatever, and they just want to come in and sit around, and they go in and they open your fridge, and they're hey, got anything to drink? And they're just, you got to ask yourself first, okay, would I ever go to that person's house, this individual's house, and do that? Would I go in and just any time of day? Well, the first answer you're probably going to say is, no, I don't have time for that, right? So why has this person got so much time on their hands, right? So right there, they are actually vampires, energy vampires, because they shouldn't be showing up at your door every day. They should be living their own freaking life. And then on top of it, would you go in there and just open their fridge and just pull something out? And if it's like, hell no, well, that's a personal boundary that you have. And perhaps your spouse allows that because, well, he's my brother, man. He's my brother. I'm glad he's your brother, but he's not my brother. And I know we're married and I love him, but that's my refrigerator and that's crossing my boundary. That's a boundary of mine, and he needs to have respect. I wouldn't go into his house and open his fridge and just grab something, and I don't think he should do that to me. So it's actually just asking yourself, would I do that to them? And then another way would be to say, okay, would I do that to my next door neighbor? Right? If you wouldn't do it to your next door neighbor, you should. I don't care if it's family. Family needs to work all the more harder to have that respect so that they can keep a good relationship, so that they can't, because when you don't, you end up resenting each other. And then a lot of times you get these torn families that have all kinds of conflict because they're just taking each other for granted and just putting their nose where it doesn't belong. And you end up with a mess. So it needs to be dealt with. And it might be that you need to let them know, look, I know when my husband was a bachelor or whatever, this may have been your behavior, but he's married to me now. And if it was just me living here, would you be doing this? No, well, I'm here now. And so I want a boundary here. Number one, I want you to call and ask if it's okay to come over before you just show up at my door. Number two, don't just get in my refrigerator. I've bought things, I have them for certain things. Bring your own drink. Why don't you bring something to share with us once in a while rather than coming here and taking away from us, right? I wouldn't do that to you. Please don't do that to me. That way we can keep a good relationship. It's not that I don't love you. I don't mind giving you something to drink if you're thirsty, but just ask, say, I'm thirsty. Can I have a drink of water or something? And if I have an extra, I might say, I got a beer. Do you want a beer? But don't just come in and take from my home. And have that understanding with your spouse. Okay? And sometimes you do need to bring in a third person, which is a counselor, to help you work through these scenarios. If every time you try to bring it up, they just get all and then start gaslighting and it turns into a big fight. Because a lot of times when you have that third person there, they're not going to act that way. They're going to have to listen. Okay, so sometimes that third person can be very valuable if you can't get anywhere with them. I always suggest get somebody that is completely neutral, that's not a part of a church you go to, that isn't part of family, that is neutral, that isn't going to take sides, that can just see it from a very objective place. Somebody that's not affiliated with a certain church that's got all these, it doesn't matter if the person goes to church, but if they've got all these things they're going to just draw from the Bible or whatever, okay, and just give you the answer from there, they haven't really studied and understood human behavior completely. So make sure you get somebody that's really neutral. Live, and look at all this smoke. That's my incense going. That's funny. I got all this smoke going through. I think this summer has been one of the hardest summers I've ever had to go through as far as just feeling dry and heat, and the fires here in California have just been awful the last 3 years. And the interesting thing now that I'm going into intuition, intuition is really closely tied with psychic ability, and we all have psychic ability. Some people are just way more in tune to it, and they have one of their abilities is just really stronger over all the others. But we all have them. And I remember shortly before we started going into these fires, I heard this. I even told a couple people, my husband and some people, I heard this, California on fire. Like, it was impressed on me a couple times, California on fire. And I remember it was right prior to summer. And it was about 3 years ago, and I remember telling them, California, I heard California on fire, so I'm wondering if we're going to have a lot of fires this year. And sure enough, we just had fire after fire after fire after fire. It was just awful. And I was just like, wow, I heard that. And then the next year, and then the next year, and I was like, good grief. I had no idea the magnitude or why that was impressed upon me at that time. Maybe I think sometimes it just helps us to know that we are connected with something higher than just this physical realm. I think sometimes it's just to help us understand that, know that there are angels, and there is a higher self, and there is another realm around us that is speaking to us, and that we can tune into it. So sometimes what we get intuitively is not always so that we just act on something. And so I wanted to go into intuition, and intuition can really tie into boundaries in a lot of ways, because to be intuitive is just to have, first of all, a knowing. There was a study done that I heard about a couple years back. Like, they would have people in front of a screen, and they would pop these images, and then they would measure their bodily reactions, right? So some of them would be very peaceful and loving, and some of them would be funny and would stir up affection, and then some would be really fearful or startling. And they wanted to measure their reactions, and they found that they often had the reaction just like a second before the actual image popped up, that the reaction was already there, and it was like they knew before they actually saw. There was a knowing. And there's been studies that have shown that the heart knows that like 1,000, I don't know how many times, but it's like 1,000 or 9,000 times or 900 times or whatever, faster than the intellect. The heart automatically knows. And so that is where intuition is all about tapping in to your gut, your heart. It is about coming from that space. It's learning how to navigate through your heart. So what has happened is we have learned and been trained since we were born to navigate through our brain. And the brain is all about logic. So it thinks logically. So it goes, okay, well, there's a pool of water and there's a toddler. So we need to take the pool of water out or take the toddler out, because logically I know from all the data that I've brought into my mind over the years that toddlers and water are danger, 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 danger. That's how the brain works, okay? But the problem comes when the brain doesn't see those things. And so, but the heart does. The heart knows. So the heart may sense, don't say that. Don't go there. Or the heart may sense that this person's okay even though they look really rough. You can trust this person. But the brain is going, are you kidding me? It looks like a drug addict. Don't trust that person. Or the brain may, or your heart may be saying, I don't trust this person, but they're so nice. But your brain's going, they're so nice. Look how nice. Look at all the good things they've done. But something in your heart's going, I don't know. I don't trust them for some reason, and I have no reason not to trust them. This is a knowing in the heart and an intuition that we have been so trained away from. And a lot of people get confused because they say, well, how do I know it's just not my imagination, or it's just not my fear? Like, okay, baby in water, right? It's just not my fear, putting two and two together and then coming up with a terrible scenario, right? And that's what honing intuition is all about. It's about understanding the difference of, okay, I just saw this on the side and my mind just started taking a horse ride with it. Dun, 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 dun. And now I'm at this whole thing going on in my head because my mind just took this imaginative horse ride on this thing that I saw. That's not intuition. That is your mind going on a ride. Intuition, no, it's just a knowing. And here's one of the ways that we shut it down. So you're invited to a company party for your work, okay? And everybody's going, but you hate these parties. But everybody keeps asking, are you going? And you say, I don't know. Oh, why not? You need to come, blah, 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 right? And then but you inside just don't want to go. There's nothing about it that you feel like, yeah, I want to go. But yet your logic starts saying, well, you do work for the company, and what is the company going to think if you don't show up at their gatherings? They're going to think you're not supportive. Or what about so-and-so that's your friend and wants you to go with them, and they're your best friend and they're going to, be disappointed that you don't go, or whatever, right? All these scenarios start playing in your head, and that's your brain, your logic. But every time you think about actually going, you just go, ugh, I don't really want to go to this party. But you go past that because you're allowing this to rule. And you go to the party and you're like, okay, and you feel good about yourself. Like, I'm showing up and I'm being a good friend to my friend and I'm showing my support of my company and blah, 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 blah. But you're miserable the whole night. And maybe you just feel like, why did I come? I didn't want to do this and here I am. I hate this. I'm just like, you just don't enjoy it at all. But there's that other part of you that feels, well, at least I showed up, right? Or maybe it's even stronger. And then you end up going past, like, it's like, don't go to that party. You feel like, I don't know why, but I just feel like not to go. And then you go and then something happens, maybe your house gets robbed or you get in a car accident or something. Things like that happen to people all the time. I had this really strong impression not to get on that plane, and that plane went down. I'm glad I heeded that. Or you know what I'm saying? You hear that all the time. That is intuition. That is your heart that knows. And honing that is about learning to go back to that original language that I've spoken of in my coursework and on my lives, which is your feelings. Things either feel right or they don't feel right. That is your original language that we all came in with. It was the intuition. It was how we feel about something. We get trained very young against it. When we're hungry and we cry, and well, it's not feeding time yet, so you're just going to have to cry and wait. Things like maybe you put your kids down for a nap and they can't sleep, right? but you're told this is your nap time, you need a nap. And so we're trained to say, okay, I don't trust how I feel. What I trust rather is how somebody tells me that I need to be feeling and what logically I need to be believing. And so we start retraining and letting our masculine self and our mind and our logic guide our lives. And then that gets confused because there's always a conflict going on because we're not listening to our heart. And then we start needing to bring in other people to say, hey, what do you think? Because I'm completely confused. Alignment is when you understand your heart, your mind, and your actions agree. That is alignment. And that is what we aim for. That is where you find peace. That is where you find stability. That is where you find wisdom. That is where you find what you need for your life, is when the more in line you can become. And one of the first ways to tap into your intuition and to come into that alignment is to shut down your mind, to turn it off, which is one of the most difficult things to do, especially in the beginning. I still have a difficult. I'm an INFJ, and INFJs are known for their minds to go all over the place. Like when we're thinking about an issue like politics, for example, I don't ever just say, okay, I'm 100% Trump or 100% Biden or 100% this. I'm looking on all the sides constantly going, okay, I understand this and I understand that. And I can see why they're mad. And I can see why and I get why they're doing this. And I get why they feel this way and blah, blah, blah. From every side. That's how my mind works. Literally, I'm constantly weighing and balancing everything out constantly. And when I go to meditate and turn my mind off, it is hard for me. It's not an easy thing, but when it actually happens, oh, the magic. Oh my gosh. And the inspiration and the downloads. And I feel alive and I feel like a kid again when I turn my mind off. When you turn your mind off, your intuition wakes up. It starts to wake up. When it wakes up and you hear it and you follow it and you see that every time you follow that intuition, and sometimes you'll follow something and it won't pan out and you'll be like, okay. But I've noticed when I do that all the time, I always notice that my own will and imagination kind of took over there. Like I wanted it to be this and I followed that. And I've always been able to notice that because intuition is a lot more just knowing. It's just a knowing. It's hard to explain other than that. It's a knowing. It's just a deep knowing. Whenever we are in a place where we're really angry or we're just really, agitated and anxious or sad and full of grief, it makes it very difficult for us to hear our intuition. The first and most important thing to do is to calm your central nervous system. And I have several videos that give ways that you can do that. You can check out my channel. Fear and doubt are huge. When you fear, you can't think straight. Both your logical and your intuitive is shut down in fear, okay? Doubt happens when you start doubting, especially doubting yourself. You doubt your own truth, your own perceptions. That totally interferes with you being able to understand your boundaries and understand where they're at and where you need to hold them. And that is why I have the program that I have in Genuine Self-Love, is to help you start with commitment and then learning how to integrate the different parts of yourself, and then going into your core wound and creating your avatar and with intention and all these different pieces that build upon each other that help you to tap into the center of who you are, to understand where your boundaries are and to know how to enforce them, and to be able to navigate life in a way that helps you to be able to live your best life rather than just being in this defense mode all the time and in like the PTSD mind where it's like fight, flight, or freeze. One of the most powerful things that you can do for yourself is to learn how to trust yourself, to learn how to love yourself, to learn to know who you are and what you want and what you desire, to get back to self, to get back to self-respect. Because how can we expect somebody else to respect our boundaries if we can't respect ourselves? Okay, how can we expect somebody else to care about us if we're not cared about us? Oh, I want you to care about whether or not I eat chocolate, but I don't care. I eat it anytime, and then my husband brings it, and I'm like, oh, he doesn't care about me. He knows I'm diabetic, but yet I'm getting it. You know, if I'm not caring about myself, right? And I say that scenario because I've been through that scenario in my mind, and I've had to tell myself, wait a minute, Liz, you need to take care of yourself first. And then you can say, hey, thank you for getting that for me, but I'm diabetic and I don't eat that. But if you're eating this kind of stuff anyways, don't expect them to mother you and parent you and baby you. Have your own self-respect, right? Have your own self-love. Have your own self-care first. So important. And if you don't already have this, then hire a coach. Get on board, or a therapist, or somebody that can help you get on board with you. Make an investment in yourself of time, of money, of energy. Invest in yourself. That's the first way you say, I care about me, is you invest in you. You still need to say, hey, I count too. I matter too. You need to include yourself. I will leave links below if you want to hop on a call with me, and we can talk about what your needs are and how I can help you. I hope this has been a helpful live for you. And please let me know down in the comments if you had any shifts or any aha moments or any help or something that you took away that you're going, yeah, I needed that, or that helped a lot, or that helped me see something in a different way that I think gave me a new tool. It's gonna really help me in a certain situation in my life. And give it a thumbs up would be really appreciated.